Go ahead and start.
Go, Mike, go.
Mohammed Takiapi, Ampeto Astedo. Hello, my relatives. It's a good day today. My name is Mike Jetty, Indian Education Specialist here at the OPI, and it is my honor to introduce tonight's webinar. And so I'll be reading a prepared script here so I don't go off track, because you never know with a guy like me. So looking forward to tonight's workshop. And I was just telling Jordan and Miranda that a lot of the activities that they've put forth so far, I've been able to utilize in lesson plans I've been writing and workshops. So thanks to both of you, that is very cool. And so already I'm putting this information to good use. So let me pull up the instructions for the webinar and we'll get started. All right, well, hello and welcome to the Montana Office of Public Instruction, Indian Education for All's webinar series, Unpacking the Essential Understandings Regarding Montana Indians. Now, we're so glad that you've joined us this evening. Many of you again, and some for the first time. We have an incredible presentation in store for you. First, as this is a virtual format, I'd like to share a few instructions and Zoom tricks with you. We are recording this meeting for future use, so all will be on mute except speakers, and only the current speaker will appear on your screen. Please use the chat feature throughout the presentation should you want to ask a question, share an aha moment, or in Dakota we say aha moment, wish to share a relevant resource, or participate in responding to the questions brought forth in the presentation. Also in the chat will be important links for renewal units and resources, including a link to the Google Drive folder that will have all of the resources mentioned in the webinar for one-stop shopping format. These resources will include a renewal unit attendance sign-in sheet. Please also put your full name in the chat as a roll call. This will be especially important to put your name on if you want renewal units for this evening. The sign-in and the post-webinar survey, the link for which will be in the chat near the close of the webinar, will be required for renewal units. The survey will be open just for 24 hours after the webinar and should not take more than a few minutes to complete. So please do that for us. We get a lot of good info from that. The links for the resource folder and the feedback survey are also on the reminder letter you received yesterday. We will also be going to a site for a word cloud activity. We'll be in a chat and we'll be a Menti. And so Miranda will give you instructions on that. But when you get to the site, put in the code 207089. And again, this will be in the chat. And so just ask for that Menti code when it comes up. We are very excited for this new and improved webinar series too, focused on the essential understandings regarding Montana Indians. The essential understandings serve as the foundation for all of the work we do in Indian education. And one thing that was really cool for me back in 1999, I got to be part of that original group that wrote those essential understandings. At that time, we had no idea what would come out of those conversations. So it's very cool to see that. And so one of the most valuable aspects of the essential understandings is the emphasis on Native perspectives. It is especially important in these times as educators to support the inclusion and acceptance of multiple points of view. The more perspectives that are brought to the table and valued, the more we can see the opportunities where we can challenge ways that institutionalized racism restricts equitable education for all. And so the essential understandings it's a powerful document. It's been a catalyst for other entities to develop their own essential understandings. North Dakota, South Dakota, Oregon, Idaho, I think, just adopted some essential understandings. So that's very cool, as well as the National Museum of the American Indian. And so a few years ago, after consideration of teacher feedback, we revised the essential understandings, put a little more information in them and made them more accessible, and just put a little more depth in them. And so in these two wonderful presenters can help unpack some of that dense material and wisdom and knowledge that's embedded within those essential understandings. So I get to introduce them now, Miranda Murray and Jordan Langford Forrester. Jordan, also named Bright Tail Woman, is Aani and Anishinaabe, and Miranda is a descendant of the Yankton Sioux tribe of Fort Peck. Jordan and Miranda are both Indian Education for All instructional coaches for their school district. They're also the lead facilitators of Bright Tail Education, an education consulting company that provides culturally competent education strategies, equity training, and dropout prevention plans that serve American Indian communities. Both facilitators have presented nationwide in their efforts to spread awareness and support concerning Indian education for all and equity in the classroom. And so without further ado, I'll stop reading here and turn it over to Jordan and Miranda, and looking forward to tonight's presentation. All right, so thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back. We're really excited to have you here, and welcome to, I hear we might have a few newcomers this evening. Really excited for all of you to be participating. My name is Miranda Murray, as Mike said, and I am an Indian Men for All instructional coach and co-facilitator for Bright Trail Education.
Hi, I'm Jordan. My Ani name is Bright Trail Woman. As instructional coaches for the Great Falls Public Schools District, we help other educators incorporate Indian education for all in their classrooms. So whether we co-facilitate or team teach, we just travel around our district and help. Miranda's a elementary level, and then I'm secondary. I also run a dropout prevention program for our American Indian high school students, where we incorporate Indian education and Native perspective in all of our core content classes, as well as our elective classes. We get a lot of questions from educators in our district and administrators because they know that they're supposed to do Indian education for all, but they don't really know where to start, or they get nervous because they're worried about delivering a perfect lesson where everything's great. And we love the lessons. OPI has really great lesson resources for you on their webpage. But what we hope to come out of this is not just one lesson that you do with IEFA, it's continuing that conversation in a way that you can naturally infuse Indian education for all throughout the school year. Whenever it's applicable, wherever it makes sense, have those conversations and keep teaching and reteaching your students these important concepts. We're offering this series, as Mike said, these essential understandings are dense at times, they're multi-layered, they're multifaceted. And so we're calling this the Unpacking series, just to kind of simplify things in a way that makes sense for your students, or in a way that makes sense for you to better disseminate this information or understand it yourself if you're unfamiliar with these essential understandings. So we want to thank OPI for allowing us to be a part of this webinar series. And thank you guys so much for spending your time with us this evening. So with that, we'll get started.
Yeah, as I'm sharing my screen here, I just want to add on top of what Jordan just said, which is all very true information. The other part that we hear from teachers often is that time constraint. We are often asked to fit a lot of curriculum and a lot of information into a small amount of time with our students. And we want to make sure that the EFA lessons that you're looking to do and the content you're looking to incorporate really is enriching what you're already teaching. We're a big fan of figuring out ways to use one lesson to teach multiple things to make a better use of your time, so you're not feeling rushed all the time. All right, so I actually have a poll for you. You should be able to, in a moment, see the poll on your screen. And I want you to choose the answer that you feel best fits the question. And the question reads, what is the most convenient part about making a reservation at a restaurant? You can pick the restaurant and location. I can call and plan ahead of time. The restaurant can make room for the number of people in my party. I don't have to cook my own food. And I enjoy being hosted and treated like a guest. So again, choose the answer you think best fits. And we'll give everyone a moment to be able to select that. If for whatever reason the platform that you are accessing this webinar on, that you cannot see the poll on your screen, you can certainly put a little blurb in the chat. Couple more seconds. All right, so I will put those results on the screen for you. So it looks like the one that won the most is I can call and plan ahead of time. Closely followed by the restaurant can make room for the number of people in my party.
So what's misleading about the term reservation is, and it's what Essential Understanding 4 focuses on, is American Indian reservations as we know now conflicts with this idea of an actual reservation. So when you hear the term reservation, you, a lot of times, especially students, correlate it with, oh, someone saved a spot for me. And as a student, I thought that reservation land was land that was given to American Indians because of how they were spoken about, and had essentially been taught that the government was very generous in giving these lands to American Indian people. And it wasn't until I went to college that I learned that, in fact, you cannot give someone something that they already own, something that's already a part of their own property. You can't give that to someone as a gift. And so as we move forward with Essential Understanding 4, we're going to keep circling back to this idea of our idea of what a reservation is in the context of how we think of reservations now, but what it actually means as a land base. And you cannot give someone something that they already own, something that's already their own property.
Exactly. All right, I'm going to bring my screen back up here, and we're going to look at Essential Understanding number 4. And Essential Understanding number 4 says, though there have been tribal peoples living successfully on the North American lands for millennia, reservations are lands that have been reserved by or for tribes by their exclusive use as permanent homelands. Some were created through treaties, while others were created by statutes and executive orders. The principle that land should be acquired from tribes only through their consent with treaties involved 3 assumptions. Number 1, both parties to treaties were sovereign powers. Number 2, Indian tribes had some form of transferable title to the land. And number 3, acquisition of Indian lands was solely a government matter, not to be left to individual colonists or states. So this is a really great example of these essential understandings being very wordy and having a lot of content in them, really dense. So if you have not joined us before, we are going to now venture over to menti.com. So I put the link to menti.com in the chat. I'm going to copy the Essential Understanding there so that you can see it. And then I will be giving you a code.
So you're going to go to that www.menti.com site, and Miranda will also give you the code as she just said. But what we're asking you to do now is, from that Essential Understanding, obviously this is a very compound, multi-layered piece of information. How can we begin to break that down? So look at words or word phrases and enter those into the Menti cloud.
So when you get to that website, you're going to enter the code 4021080. I'll put that in the chat as well. And you're going to put in some words or word phrases that you think are the most important parts of that essential understanding. So again, you can refer back to the essential understanding in the chat. When you reach the Menti website, you're going to put in the code 4021080. And then, as you can see on your screen, as everyone starts to submit their answers, it's going to populate with the word phrases that people are submitting. The cool thing about this tool is that it's free. You can certainly use this in your classroom. It's a great online resource, social distancing tool. Kids can access this from their phones. We know that most of our kids have phones. And the most common phrases that are going to be put in are going to appear larger. And so as people are filling these in, we're going to start to see this change and repopulate on the screen.
You can, Nate, do more than one if you would like to. I believe you can have up to 3 entries.
We'll give everybody some time to enter in their phrases.
We will also be saving this Menti cloud after it's finished, and that will be a part of your resources that are available to you. So if you go back and start to think about 4 and you say, I don't know where to start, these words or word phrases is a great way to begin breaking it down and introducing it instead of this overwhelming, overarching, huge concept. It's just a great way to start breaking down vocabulary for your students or concepts.
Yeah, another good way to use this tool with your students is to kind of use it as you can use it as like a compare and contrast from the beginning of your learning to the end of your learning. As you guys are going through different concepts, you can see the phrases that they find most important before they've learned about it, and then compare it to what this looks like once they've had time to absorb more information to see if their ideas of those important words have changed. We'll give it about 30 seconds more, and then we will continue on. Thank you so much for your participation. Again, if you're having a hard time accessing any of the things we send you to, you can always kind of participate in the chat as well. So some of those most prominent words there are permanent, sovereign, consent. Lots of great phrases.
No, I don't believe that Menti records who entered what.
No, I think it's anonymous, at least on my end, from as like the presenter person making the Menti. I can't see who entered what, which is another good thing to know so that your students feel like they can really safely put in their answers and not feel judged by their knowledge.
Are you wondering if a student enters something naughty, if you can find out who it is?
I'm always innocent in the assumptions. Jordan's
I am not
at assuming the behavior issues. All right, so we will save that and enter that into your resource folder as we move forward. So what you're seeing on your screen now is just some of those words that we've chosen out as words to be important parts of what we're going to be talking and focusing on tonight.
Just because okay.
Middle school.
Verified.
You got it.
Okay. I was right. You were less right. These are just our words and how we begin to have these conversations with our students. So this isn't the be all end all. If you didn't include these words or word phrases, you're not wrong. We just like to set up this exercise in a way that you can begin thinking about it and how you can start applying it, these conversations in your classroom. So we have living successfully, millennia, treaties, statutes, executive orders, sovereign powers. Those previous words that I just stated would be extremely important in a government class. Sovereign powers, title to the land, forcibly relocated, and then reservations. So reservations, essentially, how we break it down for our students, how we simplify it for our students, is reservations are land reserved by tribes for tribes. So you can begin your conversations with that Menti cloud, or you can, I guess, reverse some of those key concepts, just retell them in a question form. So you can ask your students, what do you think when you hear the word reservations, similar to how we started out this evening. And then reservations were not given to tribes. It is land reserved by tribes for tribes. Another activity, using the Menti cloud in terms of the essential understandings,
one of the ways that we flip it on kids is, especially if we haven't introduced it to them before, is to ask them to tell us, or you could have them share in the Menti Cloud, words that they don't know or need more information or don't know what it means. And then that can be a basis for moving forward on what needs to be taught more explicitly so that they understand the phrase.
Yeah, and if you're not at a grade level that's ready to hear about federal land, you can begin a lesson on the concept of what it means to be living successfully or sufficiently. What does it mean to be self-sufficient? Because that's a piece of this essential understanding is that before reservations were established, it's important to know that Indigenous people were living on this continent for millennia successfully and in a self-sufficient way. Also, what is millennia? Any of these things, any way that you can simplify it that is applicable to your grade level.
Yeah, this is one of the harder ones elementary teachers kind of talk to me about. Certainly in like 4th and 5th grade, there is some, and 6th grade, there are some standards where you can be talking about maps and looking at land base, and it goes along with those social studies standards, but it can be kind of overwhelming to try and figure out, like, how do I talk to a 1st grader about these kinds of concepts, and really picking out those parts that make sense to your curriculum. There's a lot of social studies concepts that tie into this for a pre-K through 6.
What does it mean to be self-sufficient? What does it mean to be able to take care of yourself?
Yeah.
That means that you can get your own food. That means that you have a safe place to live. That means all sorts of things. Any way that makes sense for you. All right. So this map is also available on the OPI website. And we want to start talking about another important piece of essential understanding and that's treaties. That's those legal documents that were signed with tribes. And the initial treaties that were signed between tribes and the federal government were really meant to protect tribal lands from encroachment, as well as protect Americans moving through Indian country at the time. So for now, ignore the red areas that are what we know today as reservations. And we're talking about those bigger, more colorful areas. And that involved the Hellgate Treaty of 1855 with the Salish and the Pend Oreille, Lambos Treaty of 1855 as well, that involved the Blackfeet, and then Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. Treaties, after they were initially signed, were threatened and often revised once non-natives began seeing the value in the land concerning resources and profit potentials. So initially, when these were signed, these big colorful areas, that's when people were just moving to the West Coast because of the gold rush. But once our value on resources began to change and people started focusing on more of the permanent settlement, we're going to talk about the process from these big colorful areas to the smaller red ones that we know today as reservations. Also, there was a time, and we discussed it more during federal policy, but there was a time when the federal government said we're not doing treaties anymore because it's not becoming successful for us in the long run. So that's when they brought in those statutes and executive orders, and they began to be passed in an effort to acquire more land that was originally designated as Indian territory and boundaries. So you have your original treaties that are signed and established, and federal government said, this is what we're agreeing to. Tribes accepted, like I stated, we're going to go through the process of how those initial treaties were revised, and the territory has become or shrunk to the much smaller red ones that we know today as reservations.
I'm going to ask you a question to reply to in the chat. So in the chat, I want you to reflect on this. A new family, along with the police, comes to your home to tell your family, we live here now, you'll have to leave. You do not have a choice because the police are there to enforce you leaving, and you can only take what you can carry. Your family has lived in this house for generations. Thinking about that scenario, how does that make you feel? How do you think you would respond? What is maybe not okay about this scenario? And why do these people feel like they can take your home? So we're going to give you a couple of moments to think about that scenario and how it would make you feel, how you might respond. I feel like I need background music during this time. One of the things that happens to me when Jordan and I are teaching is I get nervous during silent time and I have to turn on music. You guys are typing though, so you feel good. Thank you for everyone that is willing to participate in the chat. This really does make for good conversation and engagement. Lots of strong emotions coming through.
Couple more moments just to wrap up any responses you'd like to share in the chat before we debrief this exercise. All right, so when we pose this question, this reflective scenario, common answers are anger, scared, afraid, enraged, panic. And this is also an example of a way you could introduce this concept or this conversation to your class. So what's a really great teaching tool that I've learned that I use a lot is once you can, before you introduce a concept, if you can introduce a scenario or a question, something along these lines that allows students or participants to identify with the topic at hand, if they can emotionally identify, they're going to be emotionally invested. And I really truly believe that empathy is a big piece of a lot of the conversations that we have, and a lot of the concepts that we introduce to our students involve empathy, not coming from a place of, well, that didn't happen to me, so it doesn't affect me, I don't have any feelings about it. But if you introduce it on more of a personal level in this way, that immediately engages the students because they are asking to respond personally how they would feel or what they would do. And so this is also a tool that we use to introduce the conversation that we're going to have tonight when we're engaging people and just getting them to connect to the material or the ideas that we are trying to share. Not that everybody has to agree with everything that we have to say or our personal opinions. We don't want our students to just come into our classrooms and repeat everything that we have to say because they want to get an A. We want our students to come into our classrooms so they know how to digest information and critically analyze it for themselves, not just, well, the teacher said this, so this might be right, but this is just a great way to get students to really latch on and engage personally in material, no matter what you're teaching them.
Yeah, education through empathy is really a strong, when you invoke those emotions in a person, there's automatically new pathways in your brain that are ready to take in all that information. And like Jordan said, giving students a chance to think about how it would make them feel is going to really make them think about like, well, what happened and how can I see those events unfolding in terms of what it would look like if it happened to me. And it really does take students down a different path, and adults too. All of you had very strong reactions to just thinking in your head about, if that were to happen to me, how would I feel? And so kids do the same thing.
Our purpose is never to have everybody think all of the same way, but what Indian education is really about too is learning a different perspective, hearing a different perspective, and being open to a different perspective. Again, not because you need to change your worldview, but when you're open to another person's perspective, more learning happens.
And this is just a deeper dive layer to that too, because as students are given the opportunity to share their thought processes from their own sense of identity or place, and they're having conversations, turn and tell your neighbor, turn and chat with your partner. They're just given more opportunities to hear different perspectives on the same kinds of information.
All right, so how did those big, colorful boundaries become more confined? How did they become much smaller than the original colorful boundaries we saw on that Montana map? So more and more deals were made with the federal government, more and more treaties were signed with the federal government as it became clearer to the federal government that Americans were dispersing throughout the continent and establishing more permanent residence, again, based on those resources, that there was a shift towards. They said, okay, so we're going to do this, but in exchange for ceding or giving up more land, tribes were promised annuities or annual forms of payment. Not all treaties were the same. It was based on the needs, size of tribal members, and also the location of these reservations. So again, in exchange for the land that they were going to give up, the land was not given to them as a gift. It was more of their land base that they were giving up to the federal government. They were promised these annuities, and annuities included money for the land, usually just a one-time payment, types of housing, healthcare, farm equipment, education, and food, just to name a few. And again, not all treaties promise the same things. Just, it was dependent on your tribe size and your location and your own reservation access to resources. So I get questions from kids and they say, housing. Well, why were they promised housing? And I say, well, think about it. So you're confined to this small area. You do not have the opportunity to leave. What were Plains tribes primarily living in? Well, teepees. Okay. Are you able to go anywhere you want and get all of the materials and resources to build that teepee? No, you're not anymore. The government, if it is confining you to this area and you can't be self-sufficient in a way where you take care of your own housing, then they should provide some type of housing that's going to be able to withstand a Montana winter, because you're no longer able to travel to move camps or to get those resources to provide your own housing. And that's similar to things like healthcare and stuff too. Okay, so they set up the reservation. You can't leave. Well, what if you need a doctor? You don't have the traditional medicinal access to resources to maybe create your own medicines in a traditional way and have healers and things like that. You're going to need access to some form of healthcare.
There's a lot of aha moments when we talk about this with students and adults. There's a lot of misunderstandings in terms of kind of these things that we're going to be talking about here going on. And so it is really good to really line it out.
Yeah, and so food, the same thing. Well, why would they be promised annual forms of food? Well, they're confined to an area. They're losing that piece of self-sufficiency where you can travel and be self-sufficient and get your own food. So we need to be allocated these things. And as we move forward for our deeper dive for Essential Understanding 4, we're going to talk about more how these annuities and these treaties weren't always fulfilled and the ways that the federal government didn't fulfill them. But for now, this is what they were promised. And we're going to go into a little bit more about food sovereignty too next week during our deeper dive.
Just one more thing. I'm going to go back one slide in terms of that idea, because I think it's really important for people to understand that it's not the same for every tribe. So if you're looking, let's say up here at the Fort Peck Reservation, this tribe is located right on prime hunting ground, right? So they might not need the same food allocations or annuities that maybe the Rocky Boy Reservation would need, or the Fort Belknap Reservation, just because of their location and where the resources they were used to having would be.
Another thing that comes up, so we created this visual to best explain one commonality, but mostly the differences between these three types of assistance. The unfortunate piece about that is that there is a misnomer, there's a stereotype that Indigenous people get money from the government simply for being Native. And this is not true. Unfortunately, it's common that a lot of Indigenous people too, especially our children, do not understand these differences. So we just kind of talked about annuities a little bit in the previous slide, and annuities are based on treaty agreements and they are distributed to tribal governments. Per capita is money generated by tribes through economic ventures, most often business revenue, and dispersed among individual tribal members. And then there's welfare. Welfare is for any households that only reach a specific monetary income. So last we checked, this is just a rough, so a one-person household, if you are $2,082 or below, then you qualify for welfare. And the important piece about this is why I have any households bolded, is because there's a difference between these things. What they have in common is that they are all assistance that is distributed by a government agency. But unfortunately, what people think is, oh, well, based on these treaties, they just get money for the rest of their lives. And that's not how it's allocated. Annuities is distributed to tribal governments. It's not distributed to a single person directly from the federal government. It's distributed to those tribal governments, and then it's up to the tribe to distribute those things. Per capita is money generated by economic ventures that the tribe is involved in, right? But so often you hear students say, you know, well, you get money from the government because you're Indian. You get money from the government because you're Indian. It's common that in our district that a lot of American Indian students are on welfare, but guess what? So are a lot of non-Native students. They're on welfare too. They get money from or a type of an assistance from the government rather. And it has nothing to do with their race. It has everything to do with their economic income. That's something else that we will explore during our deeper dive, is why statistically speaking, a lot of American Indian people qualify for welfare, but it's not having anything to do with anything other than a federal policy that was put into place. We'll talk about it a little bit tonight, but we'll dive deeper into it. So this is just welfare number is monthly household. Yes. Sorry, Zach. Yes, welfare number is monthly household income.
Gross income before taxes.
Before taxes.
And it depends on the program. There's different things on the percentage below the poverty line as well, but this is kind of an average.
So we just wanted to share this with you as I guess a more simplified breakdown of the differences in this, because again, unfortunately, it's a stereotype that American Indian people get money from the government simply because they're Native. And it has something to do with the land, but it's multi-layered, multifaceted.
All right, you're going to have a poll come up on your screen, and it says, do you have to be Native or enrolled to live on a reservation? Oh, yes or no. Let me see if I need to stop this share to see the poll. People are answering, so people must be able to see it. So answering your best guess. Do you need to be Native or enrolled to live on a reservation? I'm going to give everyone just a couple more seconds. Looks like most people are in. Alrighty, so I will go ahead and end that poll. So you should be able to see those results on your screen. And it looks like the majority answer saying no, with 78%, and a few people saying yes.
Yeah, something that we should mention about the polls too is that anytime we ask you to participate in a poll, that's anonymous as well. So it's not going to say. So here in Montana, you do not have to be Native or an enrolled member of that tribe to live on a reservation. And we're going to explain why that is. So in 1887, so the Dawes Act, also known as the Homestead or the General Allotment Act, paid land surveyors began assessing reservations and determined that the population did not suit the size of the reservations. They felt reservation size it's too big of a land base for the amount of people that lived on it. They also noticed that a lot of the indigenous people were communally farming, and the federal government did not like that. So the federal government, after they surveyed the land, passed this act that designated 160 acres to a head of household. The surplus land was sold to surrounding farmers and ranchers. So that's that checkerboard area that you see on your screen right now. So we'll say that those gray 160 acres, once they were designated to a head of household, then that blue area was considered surplus land and it was sold to non-native farmers and ranchers. This did several things. This created a land shortage because once families grew or new families were created, there was no opportunity to buy more land for them. So you have your head of household up here with 160 acres. Well, what happens when that head of household begins to have children? Now you have 4 or 5 people that 160 acres is supposed to sustain. This also created extreme poverty because as families grew, again, you still only had that 160 acres to make a living off of. And this gave way to the land leasing that we still see today. So unlike the restaurant scenario, the government was not making room for the entire party.
Yeah, and this is part of the reason that, you know, as families are trying to pass down land, that we have genuine examples of, you know, 10 grandchildren maybe trying to split that 160 acres if that's still available, plus all of their families. And that's not really a sustainable way to live, even just for the generation after the head of household here to self-sustain off the land. And so then you have to find other ways to support yourself. And like Jordan said, really setting families up for poverty.
Absolutely. So just in case my checkerboard chart wasn't a good enough of a visual, although I believe it was pretty okay. In case you need a better one, this is a more realistic version than my charts. So here's a side-by-side of the Flathead Reservation before and after allotment. So reservation land is designated as land held in trust by the federal government. So its boundaries now are tribally controlled, but it's held in trust by the federal government. So then the Dawes Act or the General Allotment Act is passed. And as you can see, this policy left the reservation land base extremely fractionated, which also had a consequence of adding more levels of bureaucracy because that's now introduced. So not only do you have the federal and the tribal governments operating on reservation lands, but now the state's involved a little bit because at times you are dealing with private property owners, private land owners. So this also too is a visual from the Montana Stories of the Land, which is currently for our district, the Montana government textbook.
Yeah, a couple of good pointers also in the chat, some saying that a lot of times, especially reservation areas in general, not being super great farming land or even livable land. But then when you break that down to 160 acres, you might also be getting a really not suitable piece of land to be living on. And so then what good does that do you in terms of sustaining yourself? And other people bringing up that, you know, groups of people owning a 1/16 of an acre or things like that. And so we're really, really doing the job that was probably intended by the act of really dwindling down the land base for families.
Yeah, and again, it gave way to that leasing of land, because what are you going to do with a fractionated acreage? It would make more sense to lease that land to a surrounding farmer who wants to expand their land base for their cattle to graze off of.
So we had a couple of questions, and how did the Dawes Act play into treaties? Maybe a little more explanation there of what you're asking. And then, is Flathead Reservation arid land? I'm wondering if increased subdivisions after the Dawes Act led to more competition over water resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's when you get into, and we'll talk about that more too with sovereignty and stuff, things like the water compact, bringing everyone together to be like, okay, we need to figure out a sustainable solution for our resources. And Polson, Montana, in its past has tried to actually seed itself from the reservation under the argument that they are a mostly white community, and basically the designation of them being on an Indian reservation drives down their property values.
And other places have been successful in doing this. There's a town on the edge of the Wind River Reservation that is really technically within, I think actually the whole town is within the boundary of the reservation, but it's really on the edge, and they have seeded themselves essentially from the reservation. So their same laws don't apply in town as when you go to the border of the town, even though the whole area.
Yes, it is Riverton.
Yeah. Yeah. So just really interesting. Yeah, Riverton, Wyoming has succeeded in doing that. Very, very interesting process to follow.
And then it's still developing in court as well.
Yeah.
As to how that will play out. But for now, tribal laws do not apply in Riverton.
All right.
So this, Molly, sorry, to answer your question, what percentage, it's changed now because of land buyback. And we'll talk about that as well during the deeper dive, things like land buyback. But at that time, it was about 75, 77% just a couple of years ago that were non-native operated on the Flathead Reservation. So that's another good point too, is that it's important to keep in mind that just because you're within reservation boundaries, the thing that you see on the left side of the road and the right side of the road, it's not a good assumption to just assume that everything that you're seeing is tribally owned and operated, because that's not the case because of things like the Dawes Act.
Excellent questions. Thank you so much for the participation in the chat. It really helps us to know what you're more interested in learning about, and helps, if you have a question, usually other people have a similar question as well.
We will discuss this piece of material here, this tribal governments chart, but more so in EU 7 that discusses sovereignty and tribal sovereignty. But I just wanted to provide a guide, a visual of different levels of bureaucracy on reservation land because of things like the Dawes Act. So when you think of reservation land, it's not just necessarily the tribe. They are dealing with levels of the federal government like the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of Labor, Bureau of Land, at the state and local level, especially if multiple counties fall within reservation boundaries. You have the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, State Sheriff's Office, Highway Patrol, State of Education, and then on the tribal side, things like tribal council, school board, local law enforcement, special committees.
Really making it easy to know what to do. Right? So there's a lot of levels and a lot of bureaucracy involved. Seems like a lot of paperwork.
All right.
Making that extra confusing. Okay, so I am going to put this link in the chat here. Oh, let's see.
We can't show you the video because it's not ours, but we can tell you where to find it.
So I'm going to put this link in the chat, and I want you to be away from us for a moment and go watch the video. We can't, for recording and copyright purposes, show the video.
So if you just open up a new tab and go to YouTube, or excuse me, open up a new tab and put the link that Miranda's going to put in the chat, watch the video, and then if someone could let us know when they're done watching the video, we'll give everyone a couple of moments to do so. We will debrief, and then we're going to actually watch it a second time.
It goes by pretty quickly, so take in what you can on the first watch, and we'll see you back in a moment. All right, so it looks like some people are starting to come back. So I'm going to put a question on the screen for those of you that are back to respond to in the chat. So watching the first time through, what is something you noticed? What is something that caught your attention? What is something you noticed the first time through? It does go by pretty quickly in that part of the video. So as people are rejoining us, watching the first time through, go ahead and respond in the chat. What is something you noticed? Maybe some assumptions or connections you can make to what you see or saw. Lots of good observations. Yeah, really good observation. So I'm seeing a lot of people noticing that tribes in the East were completely displaced, obviously with the initial settlement of the colonies and the colonization happening on the East Coast there. That is a good assumption to witness in that video. How quickly the blue disappeared and left no orange in its path. That is a good observation to make. So as you're watching this video, the blue is obviously tribal lands or unsettled lands in terms of Europeans. And as that land is being taken away, the orange things that pop up are reservations. And you'll notice that there is quite a bit of time where maybe there's a little reservation here or there, but not certainly to cover the amount of land that was ceded. Some emotional reactions. It is kind of painful to watch because it really does, you know, history is subjective in terms of a timeline, and it really does happen pretty quickly in relation to history.
Sage, where are you from?
New York. Yeah. All right. Lots of emotions here, so lots of things to think about. So I'm going to put the link in the chat again. I want you to, before I put that through, I really want you to think about some of these things you might be reading in the chat, some of these things people noticed. Offers a great alternative definition of westward expansion. I like that observation. Yeah, so some of these things that you noticed, you might notice some areas disappearing really quickly, obviously coming a lot from the east. And then you'll notice, if you didn't notice it the first time, you need to kind of pay attention to California, where the land where California is today, and watching that disappear pretty rapidly. And what would be the cause of that? I saw some people make that connection in the chat, but really seeing how that gold rush affected the land and it going away like that. So we have the westward expansion, we have the gold rush, and then they're coming together, and from either coast, it disappears very quickly. So I will put that link in the chat. I'd like you to go back and watch that one more time through, watching for some of those things you saw people notice, but maybe you didn't catch the first time. And then we will debrief upon returning. If a few of you could let us know you're back, we will continue debriefing as you guys return from the second watching. All right, looks like people are coming back. As you are coming back, I would like you to just mention in the chat anything that you saw the second time that you did not see the first time. There is a lot to focus in on when you're watching that map and it change over those years. And so it is very easy to miss something. So putting in the chat something you saw the second time that you hadn't noticed the first time.
So the areas that were gray were occupied at that time by either French or British Columbia troops. So that's why those were gray areas. That's why they started out gray.
Yeah, California did disappear very quickly, almost a whole chunk at once.
Mm-hmm. And two, those where they're saying the reservations used to be a lot bigger, those weren't necessarily designated reservations. What they were designated as was Indian territory.
And so those treaties we talked about at the beginning,
the big colorful areas, all essentially Indian territory. Those initial treaties were really to establish safe passage to California.
Yeah, it's a good distinction to make because, and we're going to talk about this obviously a lot more during Essential Understanding 5, which will be next time when we're talking about federal policy, but those initial treaties really do kind of set areas, and reservations were a later.
Right.
For most tribes.
If we didn't need it or we didn't want it, that it was Indian territory, Indian territory, Indian territory, until we have that shift in what resources we're after.
So for anyone that didn't get a chance to, you're just putting in the chat something you noticed the second time watching through that you did not notice the first. And we will be looking at a couple other resources here in a moment. I think it's a really great opportunity when we're looking at Essential Understanding number 4 to really look at maps. Maps are a big part of teaching social studies and geography, and there's a lot of understanding to be gained when looking at maps because there's lots of opportunities to talk about other things, talking about resources, talking about location. Who does it benefit? That's the main question. You're going to hear us say that a lot when we're talking about resources or books or ideas or laws. Is the main question is who does it benefit? Why is it put into place? And it's a good question for our students to be able to answer, or to even just to question, why did this happen? Who did it benefit? Who did it harm? How did this affect people?
Something that's articulated to me through that video that you can visually see. First of all, I love it because there's no sound. You have to watch it.
Yeah.
And it kind of, calms students down because they're really paying attention, because it's not something it's not explicitly saying this is what's happening. You watch it. And something that I really like that's articulated about that is you can visually see that shift in the resources. So first the colonies are established, and then there's that demand for gold. California's gone. And then as you see the shift to timber and a need for cattle or farming land, then that's where that Midwest land where all that takes place starts to dissolve as well.
Yeah, great observation. Says it looks like they were just moving tribes around until they decided what land was least valuable. And that is another part of that. Who does this benefit? If you're shrinking and moving and you're making laws to adjust, you're going to certainly give yourself the most beneficial land in terms of resources and farming or sustainability, whatever you need to be benefited at the time. And so that is a great observation. It does really seem that way, and it seems that way for a reason. Yeah. All right. So we are going to be looking at a couple of map resources because I think these are great things to be using with your students. So I'm going to I got to share a different screen so that we can actually interact with this map. So I'm going to, that link will be, it's part of your resources page. And so this will be something that you can access as well. So if we go to this website, it's called Invasion of America. There are the two websites we're going to show have some disclaimers, some information, some things you need to know upon entering the website. And this website, hold on, I'm going to make my screen a little bit smaller so that I can see what I'm doing here with you guys. Okay, so this website is interactive, and you can move it around and figure out, you can move outwards and see the different.
That's what it looks like from space, in case you're wondering.
You can kind of play with this map and look at some of these different layers here. So if it'll let me click on it. So we will, if we zoom in and we choose an area, we can kind of click on getting some different information, and it will take us to valuable resources. So for example, the area I've clicked on is Crow, and it shows us the date, what it is, Crow's ID. And then it has a description and an executive order tied to this particular land area. And as I click around, I can kind of see all these different areas. This one's called a secession instead of a reservation. If I click over on this arrow here, there's going to be different parts. So this is the reservation example of that. I can look up specific places. And I believe, let's go in a little bit closer here to Montana. I believe that we can change the time and our date of where we are. So obviously this looks a little bit different than right now, but you can click on specific things. You can use that to zoom you in. And so we can get a lot of different information here. So there's some different, so this Rocky Boys Indian Reservation has 3 slides that I can look through. I can look at the current reservation. I can look at the land secession and the executive order. And I can look at the probably original reservation there. So this is a really good resource in terms of interactive. Kids can click around. Some of the OPI lessons in terms of reservations are going to be able to research and talk about different tribes. So this would be a good resource option for students to be able to research, because that's a huge part of setting up students for success in terms of Native education, because the resources online are not always good. And so we want to be pointing our kids in the direction of finding good, valuable resources that are trustworthy. And this map does those things for us.
Is there a Canadian version of this?
You know, I don't know in this particular one. The next map I'm going to be showing you is interactive for the entire world, and will show Canada. But on this, I don't know if there's a version of this specifically for Canada. I imagine there's got to be something kind of like that. So you might be able to find those resources. Certainly we can look into that. The other map I want to show here is called Native Land, and the link will be available to you. It gives you a disclaimer, kind of telling you, like, you know, kind of over time, if you talk about boundaries, different people are going to say different boundaries.
Based on perspective.
Based on perspective. And that really takes us back to diversity and also kind of this European construct of like who owns what part of the land versus like migrating or sharing different parts of the land as a whole. So you can do a couple of different things with this map. Over here on the left-hand side, we can look at territories, we can look at languages, and we can look by treaties. So I'm just gonna, while we're on territories, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You can see there's a lot of overlap. And this is kind of looking at some of those traditional lands for tribes.
This looks like something I would have painted right around my early
It's
years.
Very colorful. The other thing I like about this map is it, to the best of its ability, uses traditional names that tribes call themselves, traditional spellings, and traditional languages, which is a rare thing to find. In terms of, a lot of times we have government names on maps and things like this.
Government names, assigned names, but as tribes developed their own alphabet system, this is how they spell the names that they use to refer to themselves.
Right, so you're able to kind of click through here. You can click on something. You could go specifically to information. This part is maybe not, it'll show you some different things. It'll show you like some of the websites. Obviously, this isn't including specific tribe reservation wise, but larger areas. And if we stay on this map, so I'm going to turn treaties or territories off. Everything disappeared. And then I'm going to look at languages.
I thought the Rocky Mountains would be a little rockier.
So you can look at this map. Let me zoom out a little bit so we have a better understanding. Up close, it's kind of hard to look at unless you're looking for a specific thing. But you can look at kind of regionally how language has moved or traveled over time, what tribes are sharing similar languages, how that works based on location. So this is a really interesting map to look through. You can look at the different dialects. We have Plains Cree here, Rocky Cree, kind of looking at those different things. If I turn off languages, maybe, and then we go to treaties, we can look more specifically, and this does have, as I was showing you or telling you earlier, it has, if we were to zoom out, this actually shows some other places. It shows like things in Australia and Southern America, Mexico.
Session.
Kind of an interesting thing to see that, seeing that that using that word session or seated. I think that's a really important piece of language for our students to understand, really to come away from that misunderstanding of land given to Native people for reservations. But you can go through and you can click on different areas and it will tell you the session number.
I also just realized that I got super into this map. And so I've moved my body position. I'm actually sitting closer than I probably should to the camera. So this is my nose up close. And I apologize about that. I apologize, but I got into it. I'm hooked.
But this is a great resource. I know I was looking back on when people watch this for recordings later. The other thing is, because my screen to be able to share to you is to the side, I always look like I'm not paying attention over what's going on over here. But you can really zoom out and have different conversations. There are for treaties here, but if we were to turn this, if we were to go back to territories, I'll just show you the wider world view here. You can see the traditional lands of a lot of different groups of people. So you could, for language teachers, for Spanish teachers, sometimes that is a question we get when all teachers are supposed to be incorporating Indian Ed. Some of our teachers are like, how do I go about this? This would be a great resource to talk about.
There's Indigenous populations everywhere.
All over the world. And so you can really play around with this map. You can look at different parts of Australia. So lots of really good information to be looking through here. So 2 of my favorite interactive maps for online resources. If we go back to our other screen here, I have a couple of book resources I want to talk about. So we went through the invasion map and the territories and treaties map. Both of those, like I said, are going to be in your resource folder, links on that resource page. So I wanted to talk about some book resources. And I think it's really important to kind of think about how you are going to approach incorporating Essential Understanding number 4 into your classroom, because there's a couple of ways to approach it. Obviously, the historical aspect of that is really important, and you have to kind of know where you're coming from to know where you're going to teach it to students. We are pretty focused on the reservation portion of this Essential Understanding and how that came to be and what that looks like over time. But on the flip side of that, some people really focus more so on land and stewardship and kind of that land base or sacredness of land. So there's a couple of different ways that you can go through this Essential Understanding. So some of the books that we have here, we've obviously mentioned some of these authors before and some of these books before, but these are examples of talking about reservation life in different ways. In the Footsteps of Crazy Horse is contemporary, but also kind of jogs back and forth to the past, talking about the reservation life that this student is living, but also talking about Crazy Horse and the battles leading up to resisting kind of this treaty scenario and reservation life. Give Me Some Truth is a female lead character, and that is her struggles in living on the reservation and trying to start a band, and it's a really nice storyline. It has another, this author has another book called If I Ever Get Out of Here, I think is what it's called, and that is kind of the flip of it, that child is, parents are in the military and they move off reservation, and kind of his struggles dealing with the different environments. Then we also have Sherman Alexie. He often writes about reservation life. He has a lot of interesting perspectives to share, and that these books are not something that you can just hand to a student. You certainly need to do some teaching to go along with this resource, but it is important to be able to incorporate that kind of contemporary understanding of reservation life and non-reservation life, how that can be different. I know here in Great Falls, we are in a unique position where we have a lot of students who have experienced both of those aspects. And so giving some validity to their identity and their experience by providing some resources that they can see themselves in. When we think about kind of that flip side, like I had mentioned a little bit ago, talking about land and talking about place and the importance of place, these are a couple of books that really kind of have that overarching theme of being thankful, of being appreciative of the land and the space around you, and taking care of the land, being good stewards. So Giving Thanks is a book that we use year-round. It is a good book to offer a different perspective when we're talking about Thanksgiving. The idea of being thankful is very much Indigenous. Obviously, we know the idea of Thanksgiving is not an Indigenous practice, but the idea of being thankful and giving thanks to the things we have year-round is very important. So this Good Morning message is a great story to introduce that concept. Greeting the Dawn the Lakota Way from S.D. Nelson is kind of that same idea. It's really beautifully illustrated. I would love to do a couple of art projects. I just got my hands on this book. So I'm looking forward to coming up with a couple of art projects to the artwork inside of here. But again, following that idea of really being thoughtful and grateful and being good stewards of the land around us. And then We Are Grateful is another version of that same idea. So I really like this idea. Thanks, Josh, you have a very good point. Jordan should do art projects too, and she does, and she's very good at them. This idea of being talking about place and sacredness in the land is really important as well.
Yeah, so I didn't make a slide, but this is my slide. Something that is really great at that secondary level that is also found on the OPI website as part of a resource is the 100 Years, One Woman's Fight for Justice. And it's the story of Eloise Cobell. And it discusses how she actually went after the federal government in the largest class action lawsuit in the history of the United States when she started questioning things like land leases and individual Indian money accounts after the Dawes Act and how things were broken up. She really questioned, okay, well, if the federal government is holding this land in trust, they have the ultimate say to certain aspects. Who's checking on them? And it turns out no one was. It is accompanied by a resource guide too, also found on the OPI website, that really breaks down events and also history as well as vocabulary, which is really great. And then the movie is included too. I'm not sure if the movie is still available on PBS, but I know that it's available for checkout from OPI as well if you haven't had the ability to access it. And a lot of those concepts, again, a lot of those standards that you're already teaching in history or social studies is found in this curriculum as well. We are featuring Eloise Cobell as our featured individual contemporary person next week in our deeper dive. So I'll go into a little bit more next week about how I teach this case and this concept to my students as well.
Yeah, if you haven't had a chance to join us for the deeper dives, I really do invite you to come to that, because we get an opportunity to really talk about lessons in more of a format of how to use them in your classroom. It's really came out of this project and this webinar series. We have to give you background information before we can really get to the lessons, because you have to have a little bit of understanding of what you're doing. That's really where you're going to gain that confidence in using these resources in your classroom. But we really get to talk about those resources and look at books in a deeper way, look at lesson plans that you can take directly into your classroom. So we really do hope that you can join us for that. You can still register for that in the link I see in the chat right now. So we have some reflective questions for you to answer. And then we are also going to ask you, there were so many good questions in the chat. If we did not get to your question, we still want to be able to answer your questions. So in the resource folder, our email information is on that resource sheet. I will put that slide up at the end as well. Please email us. We would be happy to chat with you. And if we don't more information,
if we don't know the answer, because it turns out
we don't
know everything about everything, we will do our best to find the answer for you.
We will get you in the right direction. So really do feel free to contact us, because from our end, the chat goes and it's really hard to catch all of those great questions.
Friday night I'm busy though, because there's a challenge fight on SmackDown. It's actually a cage match. So if it's any other time, we'll be more than happy.
We will get back to you. All right. So in the chat, please reflect on the following questions. How did the separation from the original land base affect culture and religious practices? And how could the reservation system help preserve traditions?
Yeah. So what are the ways that the reservation system helped preserve culture and tradition? Kind of an opposite approach.
Good teaching strategy to flip that. Please take a moment after you've had a chance to respond in the chat to read other people's answers. We really do enjoy that people have been able to create a community of learning in the chat here. And so we appreciate you participating and hopefully learning from others as well. Good connections being made there.
So I hear this statement a lot from students, and they say things like, Natives are mad because we took their land. And that's more of a Western idea or assumption, that American Indian people are mad because the land was taken. It's more of a Western perspective, because you're only looking at it in terms of the value that the land brings. But the land is worth so much more than simply an economic gain. So when you think of culture, traditional ways that homes are built, or access to traditional medicines, access to food, and how you get it, you're removed from that land base. Someone mentioned sacred sites. Absolutely. So the removal of sacred sites, no longer able to go to those places and pray or sweat. And the same thing with religious practices. So sacred sites are removed, no longer accessible. And then in some ways, again, we'll talk about more about this more in depth when we talk about 5, and that's federal policy. But in some ways, that's when they started changing their federal policy, because the federal government realized very quickly that consolidating a group of like-minded people together actually helps preserve culture. It helps preserve beliefs, it helps preserve teachings, and it helps preserve things like language.
Thank you so much for participating in the chat. Lots of really good reflections in there. I really appreciate it. As we close out here, I believe that Mike has a couple of directions for you in terms of following those links for renewal units. We really appreciate your participation. Thank you for sticking with us. We hope to see you in our deeper dive. And again, please do not hesitate to contact us. I will put that up on the screen. It also will be in your resource folder if you had any questions that we didn't get to answer, because we would love to chat with you.
Yeah, please do. If you're not joining us next week for the deeper dive, and you're joining us for the Essential Understanding 5 webinar series, wear something comfortable, because we're going to unpack about 500 years of history in an hour and a half.
It's a lot to get through pretty quickly, but we hope we'll get through it. You guys will enjoy.
Well,
I think they'll enjoy.
That's a lot of pressure.
If anybody can do it, you too can. So I have full confidence in you. But I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and participating. And it was really neat to see all the conversation going on in the chat. That's awesome. And thank to you, Jordan and Miranda. Let's all give them another round of applause and give them a good shout out there. But when you guys were talking about reservations, it reminded me of something. I'll give you a little piece of advice here. If you ever get to go out to a dinner with a couple of your Native American friends and you get to go to a fancy restaurant, they ask for your last name, tell them your last name is War. And so when they call you in, they'll say, "War party of 4," and a couple of Indian people walk in. So try that out. It's a lot of fun. So, but with that, thanks again, Miranda and Jordan, and make sure to, do your renewal units and provide us feedback on the survey. Even if you're not taking it for renewal units, that's still good information to have. And thanks for attending, and thanks for all of your ongoing Indian education for all efforts out there in Montana. We really appreciate what you do. And so stay safe and healthy. And thanks to you, Miranda and Jordan. And thanks to Jennifer for setting all this up for everyone out there. So have a good rest of the day, and take care, everybody.
Thank you for spending your time with us.
See you next time.